Good Monday evening to you and welcome to the December 4th edition of Beyond the Headlines. My name is Colin Dowe and it's an absolute pleasure to be joining you this evening wherever you're tuning in from on any of our platforms, whether it's GBN TV, GBN Radio, our social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is, YouTube. Thank you for joining us. I've missed you, I must confess. My formal work travels had me out of Ireland for the last couple of months and I have not been here. Very excited to be back, but equally excited that you have had the opportunity to be rejoined, as it were, by Pastor Worm. I know that he hosted the last couple of shows and it's certainly a joy to see him back and on the road to recovery. So continued strength, good health to Pastor Worm as he walks this road of recovery. This evening, speaking of recovery, our program will center around the 2024 budget. Grenada at 50, empowering our people, transforming our nation. And we have three eminent gentlemen joining me this evening to discuss the budget as was laid before Parliament this morning. With Permanent Secretary within the Ministry of Finance, Mike Sylvester, former Minister of Finance, Anthony Boson, who is here as Anthony Boson. All right, I'm being very clear, but he is still the former Minister of Finance and former boss of PS Mike Sylvester, and also the former senator representing the private sector. And if we follow the U.S. model, I would still say Senator Christopher Diali. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good evening, Colin, and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
As usual.
Okay, excellent. A pleasure to have you all. And as we engage what we heard today, I must confess, the same as you in the public, the only person with intimate knowledge of the actual budget will be P.S. Sylvester. It is his budget as Permanent Secretary and the Minister of Finance. But as a population, we'd have heard the budget statement. We'd have heard some previews to what we can anticipate coming into the budget. So we will certainly be speaking about those things. But I certainly would want to start off with Mr. Boson. And Mr. Boson, now that we have heard it, what in your mind are two of the most impactful interventions that were made today in the budget presentation?
Thank you once again, Mr. Dowe, and pleasant good evening to the viewing and listening public. First of all, I would like to commend the Minister of Finance for an excellent budget presentation. And I'd ask me the two items that impressed me most in this budget presentation. One, an expanded public sector investment program, that is the PSIP, which moved from 8.7% of GDP to now 10.3% of GDP. This to me is significant because it is the PSIP that drives economic development. An expanded PSIP will ensure that there's more growth in the economy, more employment opportunities, and greater distribution of wealth. So really, I was impressed that with a budget with no financing gap, that we can have a PSIP that is now 10% of our GDP and almost 25% of our total expenditure. The second item that impressed me was the move taken by this administration to increase the salaries of members of parliament. And I want to clear it, members of parliament, here, because there's a lot of misconception here. Because I've been in service for government service for over 40 years, and as a minister and MP for 20 years. And we had a situation where an MP, someone elected by the people to represent them, was receiving only $1,200 per month. How can you represent your people with such resources? I am happy to see that there's a move to ensure that MPs are better paid, because by so doing, one, I think Grenada will be coming online with the other OECS countries and CARICOM countries with regards to how they treat their members of parliament. And secondly, I believe that if we pay a decent salary to members of parliament, we will ensure that our MPs who made that sacrifice to serve the country will not have to live in poverty and die in poverty. So I think this is extremely important. And I believe that if, again, we pay a decent wage, we will be able to attract quality people into the public arena. Because as it stands right now, Colin, there are a number of qualified people out there who may want to enter politics, but when they look at the remuneration of politicians, they say no way. And therefore, I believe that this government has made a fantastic move. I want to commend the minister, the Prime Minister, for the bold step taken to make that change, which should have been made many years ago.
All right. Thank you. Chris?
Well, for me, the major positive thing coming out of this, first of all, is centered around putting on my private sector hat, in that I saw no new major changes to the tax types that we normally pay, like corporation tax, stamp tax, and personal income tax. So I thought that the government kept that without no major change, and that is good for us in the private sector from the standpoint of predictability when it comes to how we strategize for the next year or so, especially on the tax system. The other important thing for me was the environmental implications that the government have moved to deal with greening of transport and the removal of duties and taxes on hybrid down to 25%, but EVs certainly 100% waiver, which I thought is a positive move for countries like us, and I think that is something that I really welcome from that environmental standpoint. So those would have been the two major highlights on the positive side for me.
Okay. Pierre Sylvester, Mike, tell us, yes, it is your document. Yes, you're intimately involved with it, and you were from day one. I know this work would have probably started August or September, but parents don't like to say they have a favorite child. But as you reflect on the budget, what are two things that you're most passionate about, that we are able to get this done? We're going to be working towards getting this done.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and let me say a pleasant good evening to all of your listeners. Just a little correction. I would not say it's my budget. In fact, it's not my budget. It's the budget of the government, and in particular the Minister of Finance, who is in charge of preparing the budget by virtue of his mandate under the PFM Act. So I am, of course, intimately involved in the preparation, so I know what's in there. And so if I were to take off many of my hats, including the hat of Permanent Secretary of Finance, I would say I think the budget appears to me to be responsive in the sense that it is not tone deaf. It's responsive to certain needs. And I think the minister, in fact, went into detail, sort of spelling out where the budget impacts certain groups of society. And so I think in that context, for me, I think that's what gives a budget credence and makes a budget impactful. So from that perspective, I would say that from someone from the outside looking in, I would say that I think the budget is responsive and it is not tone deaf. Of course, you hear many different views with respect to the budget itself. But I think if you look at the budget from where it starts and how it progresses into a new year, so you're starting from a foundation and then showing basically how you're progressing into a new year and how you intend to move the progress and move whatever you're moving forward. Again, that's an important signal I think the budget is presenting from where I sit. Okay.
Tony, let me get back to you a little bit, because you identified two things. One, the increased investment in the public sector, and also, of course, the increased investment in, I think what's framed as governance, which is inclusive of the parliamentarians' increase in remuneration. And it went a step beyond that, because constituency funding also moved to, I believe, 120,000, and this is per constituency, whether you're in opposition or in government. But let's go to the first point. How would you respond to, because you alluded to the fact that investment in the public sector will spur economic growth. How would you respond to the statement that says that probably is not true, and government should be setting policies and allow the expansion to take place on the private sector side, because they're the ones that really drives the economy, not government. And this increased investment in government probably might be a challenge and not necessarily as efficiently used as the private sector can to get monies into the bowels of society and the hands of individuals.
That is partially true, but I believe that the government's role in terms of its investment program has a significant role to play. Because if the private sector is not provided with good infrastructure, if the private sector is not provided with good transport, if the private sector is not provided with adequate skilled workers, which means spending and expanding technical and vocational education, obviously the potential of the private sector to expand and to produce more will be stymied. Again, when you look at a sector like agriculture, if government does not invest in providing feeder roads, our farmers will not be able to produce as much. So we cannot dismiss the impact of public sector spending in overall growth of the country. Yes, the private sector has an important role to play, but I believe that we cannot dismiss the role of the government as well.
Okay.
It's PSIP.
All right. Were you surprised, just to close off on that one, and you're absolutely right in terms of the provisions of roads, etc., and quite a bit was spoken of that, as well as the Western Main Road project from St. George up to St. Patrick. But no specific mention was made, to my recollection, of the Molyneux project, which remains a major challenge. Were you surprised that the minister didn't necessarily zero in on that as part of the strategy, which is taking up increased time and certainly resources, and the dilapidation of the Mount Morris Road as we're seeing it, as one wants to traverse from St. George to St. Patrick?
Yes, Colin, I fully agree with you. That, as a matter of fact, that was one of my concerns. We do have an expanded PSIP, but some of the key projects, like the Molyneux project, which is so significant in facilitating the movement of people, workers, along the Western Corridor. The additional costs to commuters, the additional costs to motor vehicle owners who have to take a much longer and more difficult route. I was hoping that more should have been said, or give us an update as to where we are with that very important project. But remember, it's not just the Molyneux project, but the project which involved the construction and the improvement of the infrastructure, the road infrastructure, from almost the stadium right up to Waltham and St. Mark. So it's not only Molyneux, the entire Western Corridor needs an upgrade. And I'm a bit disappointed that nothing has been said about that. Mm-hmm. And there are others that I could talk about, but as you know, my time is limited on this issue.
Yes, we'll zero in. And Chris, do you have any responses? I mean, because we talk about increased spend, both from the commuters' standpoint, wear and tear on personal vehicles, the transit times, which certainly can impact on productivity. As a private sector representative, certainly an advocate, even if you don't sit in the Senator Moore, were you disappointed that that was not a focal point?
Of course. I think it is a project that seemed to have been going on for some time. There are difficulties to appear with the project finishing on time and on budget, and what is happening there. And as Tony rightfully mentioned, there was another project was taking the road infrastructure upgrade from the stadium to St. Mark's. So there is, and I think there was something else in Sutter's as well, that was earmarked to be upgraded. So there is that concern. I mean, the PSIP program, I certainly don't have the documented detail with the details of what the capital spend will be and where it's going to be concentrated. But you are expecting that infrastructure upgrades is serious, and roads and drainage and slippage, you know, all of those things that we do to protect the road. So that is another serious area that probably the minister could have spent some time and some detail on. And of course, where the focus on the PSIP program will be, I know he mentioned a lot of the schools. We're building of the Christian Academy to some 27 million, refurbishment of schools, and a number of schools in the country.
Yeah, the likes of Bishop's College, St. David's Catholic, the St. Andrews, Anglican certainly needs addressing now. They got a double whammy.
Correct. So that was mentioned in some detail and the spend. So that is going to be a focus in terms of that. But you certainly didn't hear anything more outside of that. And that is something that, we'd like to see.
Let me ask you this, because one of the positives that you spoke of is the no new taxes, as it was, by way of predictability, corporate tax, stamp tax, and you mentioned PIT, the personal income tax. And let me just get your take on this. In 1994 or thereabouts, there was a new personal income tax that was introduced. 1995, with the change of government, there was a campaign on the removal of the personal income tax. The reality is that personal income tax was not removed, but rather the threshold was moved from $800 and something to $5,000. At that time, I assumed that $5,000 per month was considered a lot of money, and therefore 1996 budget had personal income tax at $5,000 or $60,000 per year upwards as taxable. In 2023, that same threshold exists. Now, as we heard from former Minister Boson, is that for many, many years, $1,200 was the salary of a parliamentarian. And one can also see for many, many years, the threshold on income tax is $60,000 a year. Is this something
it's
that...
actually 36.
There's been some adjustment downwards, so it now actually is 36. And is this something that one would like to see the government address as well? In other words, leaving more monies in the hands of employees so they can spend and support the activities in the community? You know,
it has been a topic that has been debated for many years, adjusting the PIT and moving the threshold down or zeroing it, as the case may be. And there are many thoughts as to how you collect, whether you want to collect in tiers at different rates. I think at the end of the day, what wins out is simplicity for collection and for the officers to reconcile what your taxes are every year. So they have made it very simple. You have a $36,000 allowance, and then after that you get tax at differential rates at 10% and so on and so forth. So that is one. That helps with compliance. The other thing government has to consider is the fact that whenever you move situations in a tax type, there's a concept of revenue neutrality, and PS could explain that better than me, which means that whatever you lose, you have to find another way to gain it back so that government doesn't lose revenue overall. So normally the governments tend to be careful how they play and what they play, especially when you're adjusting rates or quantums lower, so that the potential intake is less. And then you have the issue of compliance with the tax types. The people who what is the compliance rate for PIT versus land tax versus stamp tax and so on. And that is a significant thing for government, hence the reason we have amnesty and so on coming in various times, because of compliance issues. So it is not a simple thing, but you try to keep tax types as simple as possible for the taxpayer and for the officers in IRD, so that when they're doing their calculations, it's easy. So I suppose it's a balance when you look at it from that standpoint.
Pierre Sylvester, as part of the consultations, did this this issue of personal income tax, was it raised? One. And is obviously from the announcement, it didn't make its way into the 2024 budget. But the question is one of equity. And we heard Chris speak of the simplicity of the tax regime. But if one is to speak of equity, the impact or the power of the spend of a $60,000 per annum earner in 1995 is very different from 2023. And should the population receive equity by making that adjustment for the future value or the present day value of the money, and making that adjustment in terms of imposing what that threshold for PIT should be?
Well, thank you. I mean, I think on the tax side, or on the personal income tax, or any tax system or regime for that matter, I think what the government would aim for is a tax system that is simple, that is easy to administer. You have fewer taxes, a broader base, and so on. So I think within that context, if you were to look at a vanilla tax system, there has been a move towards trying to make the tax system simple, to make it modern, and so on, even with the introduction of the new tax system as announced by the Minister of Finance, the tax that is expected to take effect in January. So I would say within that context, you have to look at it from a holistic perspective. What came out of the consultations, I mean, we've had consultation over the years with the private sector. For example, the issue of the annual stamp tax has come up as an issue that's affecting, for example, the private sector, and the fact that for them it's a cash flow issue. On the issue of the corporate income tax and personal income tax, what has been the discussion is, can you lower the rate? Can you, for example, it was lowered from 30% to 28%. Can you go down to 25? But as Chris mentioned, you have to look at it within the context of the overall tax system and the implications of that for you to be able to fund and finance the government spending and so on. So within that context, I think when government looked at the tax system, I don't think there was a need at this particular stage to really make any major tweaks to the tax system to address some of the things that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I just want to go back a bit on the issue of the PSIP that was mentioned by about Minister Bosa, by former boss, and to say that all of these projects, as mentioned, are in the budget. And I think the minister on page 45, I think he outlined a list of projects that are in the budget and what he considers transformative infrastructure. And of course, the Molina is in there. You talk about the G-Cruise project that's in the budget and Nawasa is now implemented. The new climate smart infrastructure project that was just recently signed into loan by the government with the Saudis and so on. You have the South St. George water expansion project. All of these projects, if you go on page 45, you see a list of that project. And I think what the minister highlighted is that the minister responsible for infrastructure will elaborate, expound on these projects during the debate. And so you also have to understand that the budget there, I know in the past, you perhaps person spend 4 hours, 3 hours delivering a budget. In this modern age, I don't think the minister wants to deliver a budget for that length of time. Of course, you have to think about people and who you're presenting to and that kind of thing. So I think within that context, you would not get everything within the budget speech itself. But what you would find is that during the debate, these matters will be elaborated and expounded upon. And so the population will get an update on the Molina project in particular and some of the other projects that are online or ongoing and basically about to start and so on.
Okay, no problem. Tony, let me just come back to you on one thing, the funding of the parliamentarians. And yes, I know that there's been some debate, and I tend to be in agreement with you. But should someone offering themselves be dependent or looking to be dependent on the quote-unquote salary? I think I would like to make a distinction, let me put it this way, and see if you agree with me, between the increase in salary for MPs to the $5,000 and the $120,000 constituency investment, because one would not expect, whether it's $1,200 or $5,000, for the MP to be taken out of that to support his constituency. There should be a budget to take care of the needs of the constituency. And is this what we're seeing? And is this type of funding a more predictable way of funding activities within constituencies?
Yes, Colin, I have my some doubts about the constituency allowance and the increase in salary to MPs. I recall, politics is very strange. I recall when we were when I was an MP and a minister, most people thought that MPs used to get a $12,000 a month allowance. And as much as we tried to convince them that that was not true, they insisted that yes, we're getting a salary plus $12,000 to spend. So I'm glad that this scenario has now presented itself, which clearly shows that MPs were not getting that money. However, this $120,000 in constituency allowance, I see some clouding up, some gray areas. Unless we come up with some clear guidelines as to how such funds will be spent and exactly what you will do with the 5,000, how you will spend the 5,000. Is the 5,000 to help someone to come to you for a bottle of gas? Or is that constituency allowance to take care of things like that? Or what was there before, what they call special projects? I have not heard anything about special projects. And to me, I am wondering whether this constituency allowance is a substitute for what was there before, which we call the the special project. So I will need some clarification, on this, and it was not clear at all in the budget presentation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Any clarity that you can provide, or do we have to wait for a subsequent time? I'm going on to Mike. Just in terms of the use, is there a framework, in other words, for and a definition as to how the 120,000 allocation should be spent?
Well, thank you for that. I think Sabosi asked a very important and a very critical question. No, I think the minister mentioned in his speech that there is a House committee that, of course, has approved the allowances to the MPs and so on. And as part of that as well, basically a framework based on the experience of the other Commonwealth countries and so on in terms of their experience with that. But Canada is not the only country that is moving in that direction or has moved in that direction with respect to providing provision for parliamentarians and so on to operate. So the issue around the management, I think, is critical. I went into to what extent, for example, that there is a mechanism to ensure checks and balances, and that the monies are not used for the benefit of the MP personal, but of course to serve the constituency. And so you need to have a set of guidelines that would basically guide and ensure that these monies are audited at the end of the day and so on, so that you don't have an MP running afoul of the spending. So the House committee as well, they are responsible for coming up with that. Of course, the Ministry of Finance will provide support in terms of whether it's opening a bank account. And I was just thinking loudly, opening a bank account, for example, in the name of the constituency, and that the MPs have to report on a monthly basis in terms of spend. You can have, for example, a system where you have a checkbook that is signed by both the MP and is basically signed by Parliament or some officer in Parliament, clerk, or even the representative in the office. So you basically have these either two signatures and this counterbalance and so on, so that you avoid the issue of having to there's a ineligible expenditure. Then of course you can guard against that. But it's a very important point, and it's something that has to be developed to ensure that you have that whole issue of transparency and accountability. For example, the audit department should have a very important role in terms of auditing the spend and making sure that they are spent on things as the minister, as Mr. Bosen suggested, whether it's a tank of gas, or you pay a water bill for a constituent, or you build a little sidewalk, or those kind of expenditure, I would want to believe would be part of what the constituency provision will spend for, and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you very much for that. We're almost at our first break, but Chris, just before we go to the first break, you highlighted two things that you saw, that was praiseworthy. Let's put it that way. But we just were speaking of things that we need some illumination on, clarification. Still a work in progress in terms of the constituency funds. But if I'm to ask you two other areas that you would need some additional clarification on based on the budget presentation, what would those areas be?
Well, I suppose I would frame it a little different and say areas of concern. So I believe we have a deficit budget that was presented. Mike could tell me if I'm wrong. I think when I read the thing, it's 0.6 million in terms of overall deficit.
No, it's a surplus budget.
Okay.
What is that?
Mike is saying it's a surplus budget. I think in looking at the budget statement, although it said surplus, the numbers were in parentheses, and that provided some confusion, as you can imagine.
Yeah. So in the speech when we were looking at it, Mike, so that's why I said so. So I wasn't sure whether it was a deficit because the 0.6 million is in brackets, and the 36 all of them is in brackets.
You have to look at the overall deficit. That determines whether the budget is in surplus or deficit.
Right. So, so that would have been one concern. My other concern, of course, is the budget calls for a lot of expenditure in a number of different areas, and not seeing the document in terms of the revenue intake and how it's going to be meeting the recurrent expenditure is something that I would have some concern over. Obviously, the government has taken a decision that the economy is going to go at 3.6% GDP next year. That is a projection, and the economic activity is going to be driven by tourism, construction, and CBI to some extent, and that will bolster the revenues that they need in order to meet the expenditure, because remember, it's a budget. You don't have money yet. The intention is to get the money to spend on the programs outside of grants and loans, and I know our last report on loans we were at 64% of GDP, which is in a good place. Again, I haven't seen the debt strategy document to understand with the oncoming loans that is suggested in the speech where we're going to be, if we're going to stay around 64 or go a little higher, but in the 60s range. So that is some of the things that would raise some kind of flag to me to see where we at and some of the explanations around that, because I mean everything in this is dependent on collections of tax, whether it's internal or cross-border, and how that performs is going to be important.
Okay, let's go to the first break, but when we come back, we'll just speak of some revenue collection strategies that we'd have heard or we anticipate in order to fund the budget presented today. We'll be right back.
I am VIP. I am vaccinated. I am immunized. I am protected. Our children and nation depend on vaccination for immunization. Childhood vaccination is national priority. It is their protection from disease and sicknesses. Let's all be VIPs and safeguard our beautiful Grenada. I am DJ Blackstorm and I am a VIP health champion. Be a VIP like me.
Let's all be VIP champions.
A message from the Ministry of Health, Wellness and Religious Affairs, Be a VIP Childhood Vaccination and Immunization Campaign in collaboration with UNICEF and the Pan American Health Organization.
Your life is yours, your future's in your hands, your body is yours, that's why you need a plan. You gotta plan your family, avoid HIV, get the education from the Grenada Planned Parenthood Association.
We offer STI screening, gender-based violence counseling, prenatal and postnatal checks, injectables, condoms, pap smears, and other sexual reproductive services. Open Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. The Pointu Street, St. George's. Whether male or female, it doesn't matter. We're here to make your life better.
Grenada Planned Parenthood Association.
For appointments, call 440-3341.
can't wait to see my granddaughter.
Welcome back, viewers. We're talking the 2024 budget with some esteemed gentlemen, Anthony Boson, Mike Sylvester, Christopher Diali. When we left off, Mr. Diali, you would have mentioned the challenge that you would have had, as it were, with the financing of the budget. And I want some comments. I'll come to you, Tony. If you just mention whether or not you share the same concern. We talk about the public sector expansion and the other good things that are included in the budget. Do you have, one, the same concern as to how this budget will be financed? And secondly, in your opinion, what you would like to hear more of, or if there's something that is a challenge to you as you would have listened to the budget, what would that be?
Right. It is always good to hear that a budget has no financing gap and that you have all of the resources necessary to meet your budgetary commitments. However, I do have some concern. We are not operating in a vacuum. Our economy is linked to the regional economies and to the global economies. And therefore, we have to look at factors out there that can impact negatively on our ability to raise the resources to finance the budget. I am not satisfied that the minister gave us enough information to allay any doubts that we may have as to the veracity of the data provided and the ability to finance the current and capital expenditure. Let me give you one example. The budget relies heavily on revenue from the CBI to meet its current as well as capital obligations. The question is, how confident, how solid is this CBI in terms of future revenue? Can we rely on the CBI as we did before, with all the developments taking place out there? We know what happened to offshore banking. We know what happened to the banana industry when the major powers decide to intervene based on their own self-interest. The question is, do we have a contingency if we do not realize the kind of revenue that we would like to raise from the CBI? I think that is a concern that bothers me. And I'll stop here for a while.
Okay. P.S. Sylvester, if you can respond, and I'll just put something out here. As the ministry would have deliberated, and I know that the CBI office falls under the Ministry of Finance, are you confident, just from where you sit, that the diversification attempts of the CBI program can continue to generate the revenues that we've been seeing in the past? And I put that on the backdrop on a couple of things. It is probably reasonable to anticipate probably a reduction in applications coming from Russia, because that was part of the spike that we saw in 2023. But to develop a little bit more on what Tony would have mentioned, we also saw in the U.S. there's a residency requirement being introduced for the E2 visa, and the agents out there selling Grenada as a citizenship Championship by Investment destination relied quite heavily on the fact that a Grenadian passport led to E2 visa in the U.S. And it was seamless. Now there is, I believe, a 3-year residency requirement in Grenada. So just that, can we really remain confident that the CBI can continue to generate the type of funds that it has so that it can be used for things like the St. John's mitigation and the safety net that the minister would have referred to today in putting away some of the monies, 10% I think it was, heading towards the ECCB in case of a rainy day?
Right. Thank you very much. I'm not as concerned as Mr. Boson or Mr. Diali in terms of the veracity or the projections and the macroeconomic context of the budget. I think the context is solid. We have looked at what's happening internationally. We have also looked at what's happening domestically. The assumptions that we've used with respect to revenues and revenues in particular, I think they're very solid, and that has been in fact, if you look at last year, or this year in particular, the projection, the outturn has passed the projections. We faced similar challenges that we had this year in terms of the escalating conflict in the Middle East, in terms of the spillover from the pandemic and so on. And even some of the same threats that you're talking about with respect to the CBI, I mean, those have existed back then and will continue to exist, of course. So the budget, while it recognizes that the outlook is positive, it also flags those risks. Right now, if you have a hurricane, God forbid, of course, the revenue projections may not hold. If you have a major conflict, what's happening in Israel and Palestine, for example, that were to spill over and cause some significant disruptions to the world economy, of course, you'd have some impact here, and of course, your revenues would likely drop. You have to then adjust in terms of your expenditure and so on. So that is something that in any estimate, any budget that you develop, you have to have these risks at the back of your mind, and in terms of how you mitigate some of those risks. And I think what has been happening, and I think the minister referenced the fact to building resilience and the whole issue of strong economic management and so on. So one of the things that we've done, or has been done this year, is the setting aside in a rainy day fund at the central bank, for example, 10% of all the NTF revenues. That is a mitigating factor. So right now, there's about $19 million in that account that can be used in the event of some kind of economic shock that you can look forward to. There's also, for example, with the World Bank, what is called a catastrophe deferred drawdown option, where it's an insurance. For example, there's a state of emergency, the government can draw down $20 million US to be able to deal with that emergency, localized or otherwise. So I'm saying obviously say that there are mitigating factors that would help you to deal with a crisis, and this is one of the things that we I think this Fiscal Resilience and Fiscal Responsibility Act has helped Grenada in the context that it allows or has allowed for the build-up of fiscal buffers. So you take, for example, we just went to the pandemic. In other countries, struggle, they had to borrow, they had to run to get funds here, there, and everywhere to be able to meet their needs, where government could have basically drawn on buffers that basically build up over the years. So this is where you want to be in terms of economic management, to be able to have the ability to do counter. The word just slipped my head now, but basically to be able to, in bad times, you could be able to continue to spend at the same level.
Yes, if I may interrupt you here, because that's not where certainly I was going with my question to you. I am not going to be wishing on a hurricane or another pandemic. So I'm saying all things are equal. Today, when the budget was read, we no longer have seamless movement for E2 visas in the U.S. Fact. 3 year.
Let me speak to that. So the issue with CBI, and I mean, the countries, for example, like St. Kitts and some of the other countries never had E2 visa. Right? Their CBI is performing far better than Grenada. Right? So I'm saying that there is a market outside of E2 visa with respect. respect to CBI revenues.
Where I'm going, and let me just clarify, is that we though leveraged our marketing on E2. What we will have to do is make some adjustments, and in making this adjustment, it might be reasonable to say there is some shortfall.
I am saying, so that's not going to answer. I'm saying that depending on what the and if you listen to the CBI guys who speaking, what they are saying is that the CBI, for example, Grenada CBI was never marketed, and the strategy now is to actually market the CBI. So that, in a sense, and market in different regions and so on, where, for example...
P.S. What I heard, forgive me for interrupting you again, what I heard is that the CBI program was never marketed by Grenada. It was marketed by agents. And what they're doing now is taking charge of marketing themselves, meaning Grenada's CBI office, which is different from saying it was never marketed. And it was marketed, but the focus was on the E2 visa. We're now starting as Grenada to market our CBI program, and we have to make adjustments. The question is that can we project the same types of revenues while those adjustments take effect?
Right, so I'm going there. So and back to the point that you make about the marketing. All right, so I can argue that if I have a project, I'm going to market my project. But if I'm the CBI unit and I'm marketing Grenada, I'm marketing, for example, the NTF. That does not go to projects and so on. So we have to look at that within the context. But the point on the revenues, if you look at the budget, you will see there is a decline in CBI revenues projected for next year. And that is primarily because of the what you can call a backlog of applications that were in the system. And so this year, the increase in revenues really had to do with the increased efficiency in actually dealing with some of the backlogs. And some of the backlogs, as you know, basically came after the Ukraine Russia invasion. You still have in the system that have been processed and so on, but of course the backlog is winding down. Now, after you deal with that backlog, you're basically looking to get back to where you were, for example, in 2019, 2018. And if you look at the CBI projections in the budget, that trend is what you will see. So it's basically saying by 2026, 25, we are going to get back to where we were pre-Ukraine, pre-Russia, and so on. And of course, that is counterbalanced by the fact that we are going to market more, and of course, we are going to find new markets and so on. And even if you have the U.S. situation or what's happening in Europe with respect to CBI and the CBI program and so on.
Okay.
Sorry I take so long, but I want to just make that very clear.
No, and that's perfectly fine, because notice I didn't speak at all of the veracity and the due diligence, etc., because I am certainly comfortable in the work being done by the office. The concern that we have is whether or not the revenues that we anticipate that can be generated will be generated to fulfill the lots of wonderful things that have been presented in the budget. Let me come back to you, Tony.
One point before you go. I just want to make a point. I mean, when you look at like St. Kitts, for example, St. Kitts relies on about 50% of its revenue from CBI. We are not even close to that. So in terms of Grenada's resilience in terms of a shock on the CBI, we will far less affected than St. Kitts.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to make that point. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Tony, any other areas of concern or information gaps, as it were, as you listen to the budget presentation today?
Yes, well, I briefly mentioned the CBI, but there are other issues. I was hoping that the minister was going to provide information to us with regards to performance of the regional and global economy, because our economy is linked to theirs, and therefore that will give us a guide as to the direction in which they are going. Normally in the past, when we present budgets, that is number one. Developments in the regional and global economy. As it stands right now, we have no idea, based on the presentation, as to what is happening out there. That's one. A number of major activities. You have COP28 taking place right now. It is so important to us that we have a minister who has to miss budget presentation to be at COP28. But yet nothing was said as to exactly what benefits will come to us from attending COP28. That is a concern. We have just signed, I hope, the Samoa Agreement, major cooperation arrangement between the EU and the African states, African, Caribbean, and Pacific states. And there is nothing new, and I just want to sidetrack a little, because I'm hearing a lot of hubaloo about signing this agreement and we go sign out of away our rights, something like that, and that is a bunch of hogwash. And I'm telling you why it's a hogwash. In the year 2000, I went to West Africa and I signed the Cotonou Agreement on behalf of Grenada. And there is nothing dissimilar between the Cotonou Agreement and what we have right now. It is a pattern going back to the Lomé Convention. Yeah? What governments do right now, initial the overall agreement. But when it comes to implementation, you have to go on a country by country level. And you have to have that agreement on that level. And if there is any discord between what they want to give to you and what you want, you have a right to refuse. So what you have signed right now does not bind you in any way to do what they're suggesting that you do. That is total false, and I think we should get away from this false narrative and look at the agreement as it is. Almost every country will sign the Samoa Agreement. I'm pretty sure about that. You initial and overall agreement, but it must come down to the individual country to see if anything there is consistent or inconsistent with their own laws and norms and things like that. And that is where you have the right to decide yea or nay. What you sign out does not bind you to anything.
Okay, understood. Chris, let me bring you in here. As Tony would have alluded to, there wasn't necessarily a strong regional or global context. Whether we're talking the idea of the COP28, we're looking at, while a lot of climate initiatives were mentioned, the global context was not. One of the things right in our backyard is Venezuela versus Guyana, and some noise even between Suriname and Guyana within the last couple of days over territorial disputes. And how can that impact us? Would you have also liked to have seen more, heard more, to contextualize our outlook in this budget?
Yes, Tony is right. I think there was a paragraph or two that mentioned regional and global performance of global economies. I think the minister mentioned the issue of our traditional partners, the US and England and so
Canada.
on, and Canada,
right,
and what is happening there and the possible impacts on our side. So there was some consideration given there. There wasn't much about the regional impact because you didn't hear much about the Guyana, Venezuela, or Suriname issues and the possible impact with Guyana now becoming a major oil producer. And we know what's going on in COP28 in aligning what is happening with oil production and the COP28. There is a divergence on views. The president of the COP28 is saying that, the science has not said that less oil production is going to reduce CO2 emissions. So you're hearing that now, and he's talking about more CO2 capture and methane and all of that coming up now that we never heard. But to me, and Tony's point is relevant to there, when he said, there isn't any tangible benefits you're hearing coming from COP28 to Grenada in terms of climate resilience and adaptation. How much money are we getting from attending these things in real monies so that we could say we deal with coral bleaching, we deal with sea rises. What is happening? We have the issue of the Carnage, significant sea rise and what is happening on the Carnage and the wall and the penetration of the sea. You heard nothing about how we're going to deal with those issues from a climate resilience point of view. And I mean, those are major threats to us right now. It's not like later in the next 5 years when temperature may reach 1.5 degrees. The issue is how do we have the money to deal with these infrastructural issues that is going to need mitigation and adaptation to get things to happen. So there is a need for deeper discussions. As I said earlier on, I haven't seen the detail of the PSIP program. Even under the section dealing with environmental, there was is very little or no mention about resilience and adaptation, except through agriculture. There's a project about agriculture and that, but nothing seriously from an infrastructural point of view, how we dealing with it. So yeah, there is need for some deeper discussions there, because these are things happening to us now. We can't wait for later.
Okay. Mike, let me bring you on here, because probably you can share some light. I don't know if the G-Cruise project might be one in terms of climate resistance that you would be willing to cite, and others.
Yeah, so thank you. And I mean, I just want to, so I don't disagree that there could always be more, right? Now, the minister did give a synopsis of the macroeconomic context of the budget. And of course, Chris mentioned the fact that our trading partners, the US, UK, Canada, are expected or projected to grow next year, albeit at a slower pace. And of course, if they grow, that augurs well for tourism, augurs well for economic activity and so on in Grenada and so on. So that is mentioned, and of course, it references a document which is called a macroeconomic and fiscal strategy report, and that is also tabled alongside the appropriation bill. So it is a table along with the estimates of revenue and expenditure. There is also the debt management strategy that speaks to how government intends to borrow and so on for the upcoming period. And then there is a document that is called the 2022 annual debt report. So these reports in particular speak to the international and regional context of the budget. Now, if you look at how budgets has evolved over the years, a minister may spend a whole half an hour talking about regional and context and so on and so on. Even the acknowledgements, for example, the minister could have gone through calling every single organization, every single country that has supported Grenada. Now that could take 15, 20 minutes, which adds to, of course, your budget speech. So I think in that context, what the minister has chosen to do in this particular case is basically give a brief synopsis and then reference a larger, more detailed, complex document that spells out all of the macroeconomic context and so on for the budget. So I think if they are read together, then you get that full scope, that full context that you're looking at. I think so. That's a very important point I wanted to make. And then you reference the projects and so on. And what's coming out of POP and so on. Of course, the countries, if you follow POP, the countries, the small island developing states, they have been clamoring for more action from the larger countries, who are actually the ones who are creating most of the problems with respect to climate change and the need for greater support. I mean, there are funds that have been set up and of course not capitalized, monies are not flowing to some of these smaller countries to be able to deal with adaptation and mitigation issues. And they themselves, the bigger countries, are not even doing enough. And so that has been the basic clamor with respect to POP and climate change. So it's a relevant point. I don't know how more the countries can I don't want to say agitate and so on, but they have been doing quite a bit of agitation in terms of trying to get the advanced economies and so on to do more. Now, in terms of look at what's happening. I mean, you mentioned, for example, the G-Cruise project, which is a major project, $125 million in grant from the Green Climate Fund. That project is ongoing, and if you look at the minister, of course, will speak to that in terms of that project being escalated and running new pipes from Maribo to Paradise and so on. Then you have the South St. George water and sewer expansion project, which looks at expanding sewage and water from the tunnel down to Point Saline. That, of course, was recently approved by the CDB in terms of the UK SIF fund. The $100 million US from the Saudi Fund for Development. That again is for the Climate Smart Infrastructure Project, and that project has the carnage and other aspects around St. George's with respect to building resilience to disaster. The SIAP, that's the Climate Smart Agriculture Project. So there are a lot of projects that addresses climate change in particular. And I think even the government strategy with respect to greening the transport, transitioning to the electricity sector and so on. All of these are basically to try to reduce Grenada's carbon footprint while basically advocating outside and trying to build strategic alliances and so on to be able to help address the climate issue. So it's a major concern. Whether and to what extent the countries could be doing more, Grenada could be doing more, that's for debate. But it's not. I know it's not as simple as perhaps we might want to take it, because you're fighting against these bigger countries, if you want to say, to actually do more. And of course, everybody, they have their citizens that they're trying to placate to, and of course, so there are a lot of issues that are involved in these negotiations. So, but the points are well taken. I think we need to get a sense as to what more can we need to do to basically help move the agenda forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. It is time for a second break. So we'll take our break, and when we come back, we'll be dealing with specific themes. So we will look at the discussion around health, the discussion around education, and other areas that came up in the budget presentation today. We'll be right back.
Do you have muscular pain that no one can find a solution for? Are you tired of taking meds for joint and other pains? Hills and Valley Medicare Center on Grenville Street, St. George is here to help you heal. We will help you map a path to your full recovery. Visit us Monday to Saturday for a consultation with our on-site doctor, physiotherapist, and massage team. You will be glad you did. Our Medicare Center, a proud member of the Hills and Valley group of companies. On the hilltop or in the valley, we are with you wherever life takes you. Hills and Valley Pharmacy. Your health is our business.
Have you heard about the new Softweave bathroom tissue with total hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Softweave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue. Available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Softweave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
No, that's not how you cross the pedestrian crossing.
Really? One day I just woke up and I saw pedestrian crosswalks on the road. No one really showed me how to use them properly.
Well, this is how it's done. You never cross before doing these things. They might save your life. First, when you get to the crosswalk, you stop. You look left, you look right. If there's a vehicle coming, you put your hand out, making eye contact with the driver, indicating that you want to cross. And only when the vehicle comes to a complete stop, you quickly cross to the other side.
Stop, look, hand out, eye contact. Wait for pedestrian to cross to the other side, then you happily continue on your journey. This message is brought to you by this group of insurance companies, the Traffic Advisory Body, and the Traffic Department.
Hello everyone. Here is an invitation to join me this and every Sunday until December 17th on GBN Television and K105 FM from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. for Yuletide Sundays. Great music, gifts, and all the wonderful things of Christmas. Yuletide Sundays comes to you compliments Hubbard's, quality service, affordable prices, Grenville Credit Union, Gittins Healthcare, and Clear Vision Eye Center.
I want to control your anger. There's a way to feel better. That's one thing to remember. No matter where you are, you can be a star. Stop and take a deep breath and relax yourself. Take another deep breath and relax it, and relax it. Eliminate violence.
Good evening and welcome back. Beyond the Headlines, we're addressing the budget. I'll go straight to Anthony Boson. You're a former Minister of Education. As you listen to the presentation, re-education, what are some of the high points and, again, something that you may have wished would have been in there or need some more clarification on?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Dowe. Education. Again, I welcome the increased allocation for the education sector, but I have some concern. We are not addressing the key problems in the education sector with regards to our human resource development. We are spending a lot of money to produce graduates who are almost functionally illiterate. We have a labor force that is not mobile. We have a labor force at the lower end that is not adding much value to national output. And hence, when we speak of growth and the economy grows and more output, some people saying that is not true. It is true because, not because someone does not benefit. Individually, there is no growth. And these people are not benefiting from growth because they are not participating in the process. And to participate in the process, what the labor market demands now, and it's demanding more of skilled workers.
But isn't it true that we heard additional investment?
I did not see enough emphasis being placed on skills and technical training to improve the quality of the labor force and to increase mobility within the labor markets. I am concerned. We spend a lot of money, and the return on that investment is almost nil.
Wouldn't you say that in the last budget cycle, and again now,
and see how we could focus more on skills, on development of skill sets?
Would you say that the last budget cycle and again in 2024, the investment made at TAMCC, NULO, and the conversations even from the minister identified that problem, and hence that is something that is recognized? So the minister obviously agrees with you, and they would like to be moving on. Hence the increased investment targeting those areas. Wasn't that what you heard in today's budget?
Maybe I did not hear it. And again, yes, I am. We are hearing about investment in a number of schools. Very good. But I am yet to hear of any government that is willing to take that radical step to convert some of our existing educational facilities into skills training facilities. Some of our primary schools, 100, 150 students. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. We need, look at NULO. As far as I'm concerned, NULO is the #1 institution in Grenada in terms of providing labor for the skill market. But look at it. We need to expand on a facility like NULO. We need to invest more in that type of facilities. I'm not saying it. And we could even convert, as I said, some of our existing schools into skill training centers. If I had my way, as I said before on the previous program, we have children going and write 14 subjects, 15 subjects, and they cannot, they're at home. And yet at the same time, you want a skilled electrician, a skilled mason. You can't find them. We're not adding value to our product. That is why our people are not experiencing the benefits of the product. We're not adding the value. In agriculture, tourism, and those sectors, we need to add value. And to add value, you need the necessary skills. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we will say we're growing, output increasing, but the benefit of that increase is not trickling down because there's a barrier, and that barrier is the lack of adequate skills.
Okay, understood there. Viewers, you certainly can participate, so we don't want to lock you out as we're into this final segment, so you certainly can feel free to call in and air some of your concerns, observations, or questions for the panelists. But let me ask you, Chris, minimum wage, there's been quite a bit of discussion on that, and a very comprehensive document put forward expanding the number of areas being addressed. As a former representative in the Senate for the private sector, can businesses afford to respond as government has called for these increases in the minimum wage?
Well, first of all, I think where the minimum wage is pitching now for certain categories of work, construction in particular, and some other areas, we're already at that rate. So they're going to 60, some of us paying 60 already in the construction sector. Agriculture as one. It still doesn't absorb the issue of labor shortages in those areas, as Tony was alluding to in terms of skills. I think the sector that is going to get the hardest probably change or thing is the accommodation, the hotel sector, because they are going to see significant increases in some of their categories of work if they were paying at minimum and not adjusted so far, because this is 10 years in the coming, 12 years thereabouts. So some of us have adjusted up already. So there is that, but there is also the impact of government. Government is going to have an increase in their wage bill due to people at that level that they employ, the bushers and all of that and so forth. And then you have this new concept of a livable wage of $1,200 that is going to impact more seriously than I think we think, because there is a lot of categories that are not in the minimum wage order that is going to cover this livable wage is going to cover. So apart from domestic workers and so on, you may have a gardener that coming home to you to do certain things, and if he doesn't want, if you can't afford to pay him or her at a particular level, then the obvious thing is what happens when you say, well, I can't afford you anymore.
Right, because this one is a minimum of $60 a day, and if it's monthly, it's $1,200, I think is where we're going to.
Correct, and that is the issue here for some of us in that sector. In the private sector, particularly security guards, I think are handled in a particular way in the minimum wage, and I think most companies are there already. So I don't see the impact to be severe, but it is going to have an impact on the wage bill for some of us and what happens in the different disciplines of work that we engage people to do. But I just want to go back quickly on Tony's thing with the education thing. And I am also of the view that a huge part of the 240-something million allocated to education, a huge part is going to be capital. And I agree that the skills training is a critical part of the education system, and we need to invest more into skills. But I also think we have a greater concern, Colin, and that is we are not seeing the number of students coming through pre-primary and primary as we had before. We have pre-primary and primary schools closing down in some parts of the country. So the volume of students coming through to secondary and higher is going to be a concern for us probably in the next 10 years. Here we're building a lot of more schools and looking to attract students, and the classes are getting smaller. And the issue is, the other issue for me in the digital thing with training, I hear about skills, but I also want to understand the digital focus for students going forward, especially with AI as a major disruptor coming. How are we training our students to deal with that disruption? How are we investing in them to be part of the disruption and getting on board with AI and the technology involved there and becoming AI compliant? I haven't seen some of that conversation, and that is something that is here with us now. This is not waiting for 10 years. Right. It's here now. How do we adjust the curriculum at the tertiary, at the secondary level to deal with the disruption that AI is going to cause?
Okay.
And that conversation, you know.
I believe we may have a caller online, do we?
Yeah. Hello?
Yes, go ahead, caller.
Yeah, good night. I want to talk concerning the coronage, because I heard the issue was based on the coronage in terms of the water level, and if you look at it the way it is, probably in the next 3, 4, 5 years, some business may have to raise the level of the foundation. But I believe one of the problems is that if you look at it, if you have a pool and you have water and silt and whatever going into it, it will raise the level of the pool or the water level. So I believe one of the problems we have on the coronage is lack of the insight in terms of dredging the coronage. I believe if we dredge the coronage, we'll be surprised of the level of the water that will drop. So I don't know if the Ministry of Works or whoever is in or environmental, whoever is looking at it, basically speaking, seeing that we seem to want to develop the coronage to be an area of interest for locals and foreigners. I believe what we need to do is dredge the coronage.
Okay, we got that. Basically, increase the volume or capacity of the carnage.
There have been many studies done on carnage. The guys know exactly what the problem too is. The integrity of the wall that supports the road to the sea. It has become very porous over the years. It has cracks. There are businesses on the carnage that pump in seawater to the foundation almost 24/7 because of the seepage coming through. So it's a lot more than silt and deposits of silt. And deposits of silt have nothing to do with the level of the sea rise. And we have the sea rise level. And that is a major concern. And I know there's a project PS Mike could speak to that talks about how we revamp the whole carnage and increase the barrier and all of that and make it a nice walk and so on and so forth. So there is a project I know on board and have been in discussion. So the issue is, as PS Mike indicated, that the Minister for MIT is going to probably give more information on how that comes into the environmental resilience part of the thing.
All right, PS, let me bring you in here. You certainly can comment on the last issue. You don't have to, but I certainly would want to hear, because I'm going to switch a little bit to health here on you. I know you are in the Ministry of Finance, but the NHI, we've been talking national health insurance now forever, and we still have nothing. Is there hope? Apart from another study and another proposal, is NHI for Grenadians on the horizon?
Well, I would say yes. The government has recently signed an agreement with Grenadian neurosurgeon and STEAM to basically build out the NHI. You know, that was a project that started a couple of years ago, if you're aware. In terms of basically trying to move that forward. And there was some work that was done in terms of engagement and consultations and so on. And of course, with time, I guess something fell to the cracks. So basically, having recognized the importance of NHI in terms of health financing, in particular ensuring that there are no barriers to the health and so on based on economic status and so on. I think the government has signaled that it's a very important project and has basically signed an agreement to move that forward, and not just sign an agreement, but sign an agreement with milestones that the consultant and so on will have to deliver on to ensure that we can measure success as we go along.
Okay. So let me just quickly, as we run out of time, again, I'm going to stick to health. Teaching hospital, replacement hospital, what's the model for delivery? I know that government took the first steps, and congratulations on that, because again, a long time in coming in acquiring lands. What are the next steps forward? Didn't necessarily hear that in the budget to deliver a proper healthcare system, or better, I should say, healthcare system for Grenadians.
Right. I mean, so I think you will hear a lot of that in the debate, but I mean, just by way of from what I know, from where I sit, the idea is to build out a whole health complex on the 83.9 acres of land. And a significant component of that, or at the center of that, is a medical hospital with teaching facilities and so on. So basically, in terms of next steps, is really to do the design, do the conceptualization of what that vision would look like in terms of the health sector, and then sort of move that forward, leveraging private sector partnerships and so on. So basically, and to do that, the government, of course, will need help in terms of technical advice, in terms of strategic advisory support and so on. And I know the government has written to the World Bank asking for technical assistance to be able to help guide. Because right now what you have a lot of persons coming and they send in proposals in terms of, I can build this, I can build that. But in terms of how you move forward, you want to know, first of all, what it is that you want. What is the vision for the health sector? What is the vision for that area? And I think that's where you would have, you need a participatory approach where you get all of the citizens and so on to come and pitch and pull their ideas together in terms of what that complex should look like. You may have, for example, government in terms of building out the hospital, or private sector building out the hospital, and of course with government you have a partnership that would ensure that it is fully financed and that can help meet the healthcare needs and elevate the healthcare situation and so on. So I mean, I think in terms of just a general overview, but I say in terms of how that model will develop, that will be part of the conversation that the Sub government will be having with citizens and so on, and of course, getting expert help to help drive and guide that process. Because if you don't do that, then of course, you may have 3-4 years pass and nothing happens. So I think you have to have a laser focus attention in terms of what are the next steps, designs, architectural, and so on. Financing would be an important part of that. I mean, who is going to finance the building, who is going to finance the equipment, who is going to finance the patient care and all that kind of thing. You have to sort of walk through those and then build that up.
P.S. I do appreciate the fact that I'm hearing we need to decide what we want, because I know there can be umpteen proposals put before us and we get confused, but it should start with us, and I certainly appreciate hearing that. Tony, let me come to you. I heard MNIB revamped, relaunched in 2024 as a private sector entity. What are your thoughts?
I think this is very, very good. It's a positive step. I always thought that NMIB was not managed properly. Some serious mistakes. I remember I was chairman of that corporation at one time. And, it is a continuation of a trend in terms of poor management. But I welcome the reorganization, and in particular, I would like to see the different outlets reopen. For example, for us in St. Patrick, that is critical. Yeah, because you really do not have any place to go where you can say you focus on buying agricultural produce. Now and then you might go on the side of the street. That is not good enough. Let us get NMIB back on the street, and let us open the centers that have been closed, and I think the farmers will reap benefits from so doing. So really, I support the government in terms of the move it has taken in restructuring of the NMIB.
And you believe that the private sector approach to the relaunch makes sense?
Yes, because the private sector, government, well, with the exception of a few, most government corporations, people see it as a cash cow to milk and not to produce, except, let us say, Port Authority and some of the others that are very unprofitable. But private sector intervention involvement, I think, is something that we should welcome, because they are more what you call profit-driven, business-oriented in terms of ensuring the survival of any institution. So yes, get the private sector involved in partnership in this institution.
All right, thank you. Chris, we heard GIDC, GDB possible merger. What are your thoughts?
I listened to that, and I'm not sure how that will work, because the two arms, the two organizations have probably different mandates. I could understand the GDB handling financing and operating like a bank, and actually the scope have been changed to get them more oriented in commercial lending and that kind of stuff, and private lending. I don't know if GIDC, and it's now an investment corporation, how you merge that. There are some aspects of GIDC in terms of training and so forth that you will want to impact the small and micro lenders from GDB, and you could work that association. But I don't know if the merge, which the minister mentioned, having one organization doing all. I'm not sure how that will work, and whether the separation as we have now is more of an advantage than a merged thing with everything on one page. So again, not understanding if a study was done to understand what are the benefits, like if we merge GCNA and Nutmeg and Cocoa Association. I'm not sure what that is and how that should work out, so that is something probably I'll have to reserve comment on. But I just want to go back to you on marketing board, because I know you purposely didn't ask me, because I was the last chairman of marketing board before the government changed. And I want to say that I support Tony in that marketing board has its relevance. Marketing board, unfortunately, as Tony said, the private sector part needs to come in. A private sector run type marketing board would not have the footprint that it had. the footprint that it had originally was not a feasible footprint financially. So there were a lot of units on the outside, such as being one as an example, that was a loss maker. So if you're a private sector company, you're not keeping the loss makers, you're trying to see how you could rationalize and get the organization back on a sound financial footing. And that is some of the things we didn't understand. And then marketing board is not a purely farmers organization. It handles commodities, and commodities account for a significant part of the revenue of marketing board. So we need to always understand the model and how the model suits, and there is need for farmers marketing organization without a doubt, because quality, they were HACCP certified and all of these things, and if we want to do exporting, there is a niche for that. So there is good that the government kept it. I support that. What needs to evolve now is the model and how that model is going to work, because there is a need. And in COVID, we saw it. When we had COVID and the lockdown and farmers had produce, marketing board was the place. They had to go and they got some monies for their stuff. So I say all of that to say that it is definitely a needed organization, but we just have to understand what model we want.
Okay. PS, let me come to you on this one, and then I will make a rounds for final comments. We are seeing yet again lighting of the cricket stadium in the budget speech. I don't know, it's almost like this is being photocopied. Can we be optimistic that the lighting of the stadium will take place in this budgetary cycle?
Yeah, I think you have to ask, perhaps direct this question to the minister, Ministry of Sports. What I do know is that there is a commitment to do so, and so for all intents and purposes, I think I want to hope that they can sort of move forward in that particular regard. I don't know that it is a financial issue. So it may be some of the issue that has affected it in the past. But that's as much as I can say on that. I mean, I too would love for the stadium to be lighted so that you can have night cricket and so on.
And not having to take a day off coming up in a couple of weeks in order to be able to participate in cricket. All right. Closing comments. Tony, I will start off with you. Overall impressions, and we didn't necessarily address, the idea of regularizing contract works or even the new pension regime. We didn't touch on any of those, but your closing comments as we come to our 90-minute program closure.
Thank you, Colin, for giving me the opportunity to make some closing comments. As you might know, I was a teacher at one time, so I will use this opportunity to grade both the government and this present budget. And in grading, I will give the government a grade of 8 out of 10 for its management of the economy so far. We look at all of the macroeconomic indicators and we see positives. Increase in GDP, reduction in unemployment, also people might query, but because they do not understand how to calculate these things. Inflation under control, debt to GDP ratio under control. So really, when you look at the major indicators, they are moving in the right direction. And the government must be commended for its overall management. With regards to the budget itself, this budget, I give it also an 8 out of 10. Because in this budget, I see a number of initiatives that will benefit not only the country as a whole, but individuals, and in particular, those in the lower cohorts of society. I welcome the implementation of the minimum wage, the new pension plan that is on stream to get workers regularized and having them contribute to the pension scheme. The reform of the NMIB, very good. The budget had no new taxes, that's very good. I see an increase for the poor and vulnerable by $200, and let no one fool you and tell you that the increase is just $50. Time does not permit to go into the seed program and to show you that the basics of the seed was $300. Yeah, $300, it went to $450. because it was what they call a COVID stimulus, which other persons who were vulnerable but not on the seed program were getting 450. So they give those on the seed 150 to compensate. And it was meant to be a temporary measure. That 150 for the seed, based on those who passed the PMT, it was never meant to be permanent. Yeah, so let's not be fooled into believing that this government is only giving them $50 because they take out 150. The 300 was the seed. And don't mix up seed with stimulus package. There are two different cohorts. Those who are getting seed and those who are getting the stimulus. And it was meant to be temporary, but this government extended, and when the time expired, all of those who were getting the stimulus were taken off. And the 150 that was given to the seed recipients as part of the stimulus in order to equate what those on the stimulus was getting to the seed, that was taken off as well. So the government will put $200 on the $300 to make it $500, not $500. And we must welcome that as a good initiative. And most important, that increase in the salary of MPs, I think it's a flagship for this government. It's a plus. It's a decision that a lot of people shy away from because they fear trade unions will come down on them, fear criticism from the opposition. But there are times when you have to take the difficult decision once you know it is the right and just thing to do. And this, to me, was the right and just thing to do, and the government must be commended for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris, closing comments?
Yeah, I share some of Tony's thoughts, but particularly for us in the private sector, I don't think there's any direct initiative that we would have seen come true in this budget. I know in consultations we had talked about VAT-free or VAT reduction day. We didn't see any of that. There is the issue of the projects that was listed in the budget that the minister delivered with the Kiwana Bay and all of these projects. And speaking of that is private sector development and led, yes, in one sector, tourism sector. But how do we haven't seen any general incentive for the private sector overall that will come in a direct form. So I believe that is one of the criticisms we will have from a private sector point of view.
On the eve of the 50th anniversary, I know it's your closing comments, the Kiwana Bay negotiations, including the handing back, as it were, of Rivera to be Heroes Park. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I am still kind of not sure what that arrangement sounds like and what it is. I know about the $100 million and the $22 million that was tossed about. Now we have the Silver Sands group coming in to give up Rivera, paying $8 million, and I'm assuming to get the leasehold rights for Kiwana Bay and what that entails. So I think there is some details there that may be a little sketchy that we need to kind of understand, and you know, how the valuations went. You would interpret from the figures that the Rivera was worth somewhat about 16 million thereabout, and you don't know. I mean, we're just assuming here. So I mean, the fact that we want to make it a heroes thing, I think is beautiful. I don't have no issues with that at all. But the transaction itself for Kiwana Bay for Rivera, 8 million, you're not kind of sure what is happening there.
Okay. All right. PS, you have the final word.
Well, thank you for having me and for allowing me to interact with these distinguished gentlemen. Mr. Bosa, you know, my former boss, and of course, Diali from the private sector. I'm happy to be able to share some information on the budget. As I said at the beginning, it's the government's budget, and so as a public servant who is involved in the process, why to say that the government is managing the economy well? That might be taken biasly or the context. But I think if I were to remove my finance or public sector hat and sort of looking from outside, based on what has been presented in terms of the macroeconomic indicators and so on, clearly the economy is doing well. You will have, from what I've seen, there seems to be confidence in the economy. Of course, unemployment has come down from 28.4% back in 2020 to just under 12% now. Inflation pressures have been so basically a lot of good things. So I think in terms of where the government is economy-wise, I think they're in a good space. Of course, from what I know with respect to the sudden actions that are taken to build resilience, I think we have come a very long way since the initial passage of the Fiscal Responsibility Act back in 2013 and so on. And now that it's going to be strengthened, it means that the government is continuing with certain policies to basically build resilience. And I think that augurs well for Grenada and Grenada, because you could have a situation where fiscal discipline could have just basically gone out the window. But what you have now is basically a continuation, which I think in many respects it's already a good thing. And so I really do hope Grenada can go from strength to strength and so on, and that whatever policies and so on that any government for that matter put forward, that it will be in the best interest of people and so on, and help to propel Grenada into a better place. I will stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Mike Sylvester, former MP for St. Patrick West, former Minister of Finance and former Minister of Education and former Chairman of MNIB, Anthony Boson, and former Senator for the private sector, Chris Diali. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much for being part of this illuminating discussion on the 2024 budget. And to you, our listeners and viewers, thank you for being a part of this evening's program. It is with you and for you we do this. Continue to take good care of yourselves, and we look forward to your joining us again next Monday for another episode of Beyond the Headlines. Good evening.
Good evening to you, brother.